The rain fell in sharp, icy needles upon the cobblestone streets of Ravenshire, a forgotten town nestled between the imposing Blackthorn Mountains and the edge of the Whispering Woods. Winter had arrived early this year, bringing with it a bitter chill that seeped through the cracks of even the sturdiest homes. But for those without shelter, without protection, winter was more than an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Elian knew this better than most. At 12 years old, his thin frame huddled against the stone wall of the orphanage's courtyard, seeking whatever meager protection the overhanging roof might provide. His clothes, little more than rags, clung to his skin, sodden with rain and sweat from the fever that had gripped him for days. The other children had long since gone inside, but Elian remained, locked out as punishment for what Headmistress Caldwell called his useless daydreaming and wasteful imagination. "You'll never amount to anything if you keep your head in the clouds," she had snarled, her breath reeking of cheap gin as she shoved him into the courtyard. "Perhaps a night in the cold will teach you the value of practical skills." Elian had stopped crying hours ago. The tears had frozen on his cheeks, leaving trails that felt like tiny rivers of ice. His fingers, blue and numb, clutched the small leather-bound journal he'd found in the orphanage's attic, his most treasured possession. Inside its worn pages were his drawings, fantastical creatures, mysterious landscapes, and stories of places far beyond Ravenshire's oppressive boundaries. Places where perhaps someone like him might belong. A violent cough racked his body, forcing him to double over as pain lanced through his chest. The sickness had started 3 days ago, a simple cough that had rapidly deteriorated into something far more sinister. Headmistress Caldwell had deemed him a lost cause, not worth the expense of medicine. "The weak perish," she'd said dispassionately. "It's nature's way." As darkness fell, bringing with it an even deeper chill, Elian's consciousness began to drift. The rain seemed to whisper secrets as it pattered against the stones. Or perhaps it was merely the fever, painting delusions across his failing senses. Either way, he no longer felt the cold. Instead, a peculiar warmth spread through him, starting from his core and radiating outward. It wasn't unpleasant. If this was death, he thought hazily, perhaps it wouldn't be so terrible after all. Through half-lidded eyes, Elian watched as the courtyard gate creaked open. A figure stood there, tall and still, seemingly unaffected by the driving rain. For a moment, Elian thought it might be death itself, come to claim him. But as the figure approached, he could make out details. A man, impossibly elegant, with pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. He wore clothes of the finest quality, a black coat that reached his ankles, intricate silver embroidery glinting at the cuffs and collar. But it was the man's eyes that captured Elian's fading attention. Even through the rain and growing darkness, they shone like molten silver, fixed upon him with an intensity that felt almost tangible. "Child," the stranger spoke, his voice deep and melodious, carrying easily over the rain's patter. "What have they done to you?" Elian tried to respond, but his lips were too numb, his throat too raw from coughing. All he managed was a weak whimper that embarrassed him even in his deteriorating state. The stranger knelt before him, seemingly unconcerned about the mud soiling his fine clothes. Up close, his beauty was almost painful to behold, features so perfect they seemed carved from marble, framed by long, raven-black hair that fell in wet strands around a face untouched by age. Cold fingers, colder even than the rain, touched Elian's forehead, and the boy flinched instinctively. "A fever," the stranger murmured, more to himself than to Elian. "And pneumonia, if I'm not mistaken." His silver eyes narrowed. "They've left you to die." It wasn't a question, but Elian managed a small nod anyway. The movement sent another wave of dizziness crashing through him, and he slumped further against the wall. The stranger's expression darkened, a flash of something ancient and terrifying crossing his features before disappearing behind a mask of cool composure. "What is your name, child?" "Elian," he whispered through chattering teeth. "Elian," the stranger repeated as if tasting the name. "I am Prince Lysander Ravencroft." Even in his fevered state, Elian recognized the name. Everyone in Ravenshire knew the legends of the Ravencroft family, once rulers of these lands before they were driven out 2 centuries ago. Rumors spoke of dark powers, of blood rituals and immortality, but they were just stories meant to frighten children into obedience. Weren't they? "The orphanage has no place for me," Elian managed to say, his voice barely audible. "I'm useless, they say. Can't farm or smith or—" Another coughing fit interrupted him, more violent than before, leaving specks of blood on his palm. Prince Lysander's eyes tracked the blood with an intensity that might have frightened Elian had he been more lucid. Instead, the boy simply gazed back, too exhausted and ill to feel fear. "They are fools who cannot recognize true worth," Lysander said, his voice hardening. "I see much in you, Elian, much that others have been too blind to perceive." With a gentleness that belied his imposing presence, Lysander gathered Elian into his arms. The boy felt weightless, fragile as a bird's hollow bones against the prince's chest. His journal fell from his grasp, landing in a puddle. "My book," Elian whispered desperately, reaching for it with weakened fingers. Lysander paused, following Elian's gaze. He bent, retrieving the sodden journal with care. "Your creations?" he asked, glancing at the visible pages of illustrations. Elian nodded weakly, relieved when Lysander tucked the journal inside his coat. "Rest now," the prince commanded softly. "You are under my protection." As they moved toward the gate, the orphanage's front door suddenly burst open. Headmistress Caldwell stood in the doorway, her massive frame silhouetted against the yellow lamplight behind her. "What's this?" she barked, squinting into the rain. "Who goes there?" Lysander turned slowly, Elian cradled against his chest. The rain seemed to lessen around them, as if reluctant to touch the prince. "I am claiming this child," he said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of danger despite its outward calm. The headmistress stepped forward, her face contorting as recognition dawned. "You," she breathed, color draining from her florid cheeks. "It cannot be. The Ravencrofts were banished generations ago. And yet, here I stand," Lysander replied with deadly softness. "This boy is mine now. Any claim you had over him is hereby dissolved." "The child is worthless," Caldwell said, recovering some of her bravado. "Sickly and lost in fantasies. Better to let nature take its course than waste resources on one who will never contribute to society." Something shifted in Lysander's demeanor, a subtle change that nonetheless made the air around them seem to vibrate with tension. "Is that so?" he asked, each word dripping with icy precision. "Then you will have no objection to my taking him. The church has rules about adoptions," Caldwell argued, though she remained rooted to the spot, clearly unwilling to approach. "Papers must be signed, fees paid." "I care nothing for your papers or your fees," Lysander interrupted. "Consider this a royal decree. The boy is mine." His eyes flashed dangerously. "Unless you wish to dispute my claim?" The challenge hung in the air between them. Even through his fever, Elian could sense the headmistress's fear, palpable as the rain soaking through his clothes. After a long, tense moment, she stepped back. "Take him, then," she said with forced indifference. "One less mouth to feed." Lysander's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "Wise decision, headmistress, though I suspect your wisdom comes too late to save you from future consequences." Without another word, he turned and strode through the gate, his movements fluid and predatory, despite the burden in his arms. Elian's vision was fading, darkness encroaching at the edges as consciousness slipped away from him. The last thing he registered was the sensation of movement, swift and smooth, as if they were flying rather than walking through Ravenshire's muddy streets. When Elian next opened his eyes, the world had transformed. Gone was the cold, the rain, the unyielding stone of the orphanage courtyard. Instead, he lay upon a bed softer than anything he had ever imagined, covered in silken sheets and furs that radiated warmth. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth nearby, casting dancing shadows across a chamber that seemed to belong in one of his own fantastical drawings. The ceiling soared above him, wooden beams carved with intricate patterns of ravens in flight. Tapestries adorned the walls, depicting scenes of battles and hunts, all rendered in rich, dark colors that seemed to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it. The furniture, what little he could see from his position, appeared ancient but impeccably maintained, each piece crafted with a level of artistry that had become legendary in modern Ravenshire. Elian tried to sit up, only to find his body still weak, though the crushing pain in his chest had subsided somewhat. His movement, small as it was, attracted attention. "Awake at last," came Lysander's voice from a shadowed corner of the room. The prince emerged into the firelight, his silver eyes reflecting the flames in a way that was not quite natural. He had changed his rain-soaked attire for a simple white shirt and black trousers, though even these seemingly casual garments had an air of elegance about them. "Where?" Elian began, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Ravencroft Castle," Lysander replied, approaching the bed with measured steps. "My ancestral home, hidden deep within the whispering woods, where the superstitious villagers dare not venture." His lips quirked in a sardonic smile. "Their fear serves as better protection than any wall or gate." Elian's eyes widened. Ravencroft Castle was thought to be a ruin, consumed by the forest centuries ago after the family's exile. Yet here it stood, very much intact, its grandeur untouched by time. "You saved me," Elian said simply, meeting Lysander's uncanny gaze without flinching. The prince inclined his head slightly. "I did. Why?" Lysander seemed momentarily taken aback by the directness of the question. He studied Elian for a long moment before answering. "I have walked this earth for 5 centuries, Elian. In that time, I have learned to recognize true potential when I see it. What the fools in that orphanage called useless daydreaming, I recognize as something far more precious. Vision." He moved to a table near the bed, where Elian's journal lay, its pages carefully dried and restored. "Your drawings speak of worlds beyond the mundane, of creatures and places most humans cannot even conceive. This is not mere fantasy. It is sight. True sight." Lysander's voice took on a fervent quality. "Such gifts are rare, even among my kind." "Your kind?" Elian asked, though somewhere deep inside he already knew the answer. Lysander smiled then, revealing what the shadows and Elian's fever had previously concealed. Fangs, delicate but unmistakable, extending just beyond his other teeth. "I am vampire, child. The last prince of a bloodline older than the human kingdoms that now claim dominion over these lands." He spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing nothing more extraordinary than the weather. "My family was not exiled. We were hunted, nearly exterminated by those who feared what they could not understand. Elian should have been terrified. Every story, every whispered legend spoke of vampires as monsters, bloodthirsty fiends who preyed upon the innocent. Yet as he looked at Lysander, really looked at him, all he could see was a being who had saved him when all others had abandoned him to die. Are you afraid?" Lysander asked quietly, clearly reading the thoughts crossing Elian's face. Elian considered the question seriously before answering. "No," he said finally. I think if you wanted to harm me, you would have left me in the rain." A look of approval crossed Lysander's aristocratic features. "Perceptive as well as gifted with vision, you continue to intrigue me, Elian." The vampire prince moved to the window, drawing back heavy curtains to reveal a view of endless forest, bathed in moonlight. "I have brought you to my home for a purpose. The orphanage was correct about one thing. You do not belong among them, but not because you are worthless." He turned back to face Elian, his expression intense. "Because you are worth far more than they could ever comprehend." What happens now?" Elian asked, struggling again to sit up, this time managing to prop himself against the plush pillows. Lysander crossed the room in a blur of movement that human eyes could barely track. suddenly standing beside the bed. He reached out, cool fingers brushing Elian's forehead in a gesture that felt almost paternal. "Now you rest and heal. The illness nearly claimed you. Another day in that courtyard would have been your last." His tone darkened momentarily before lightening again. "Once you have recovered your strength, we shall discuss your future. For you do have one, Elian. A future brighter and stranger than anything those small-minded creatures in Ravenshire could imagine." The prince moved toward the chamber door, pausing with his hand on the ornate handle. "This castle holds many secrets, many wonders. It has stood empty for too long, echoing only with ghosts and memories." His silver eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Perhaps it has been waiting for someone like you, someone who can see beyond the veil of the ordinary world." As Lysander slipped from the room, closing the door silently behind him, Elian sank back into the pillows. His mind whirled with questions, with possibilities both terrifying and exhilarating. He had been saved from death by a creature of legend, brought to a castle that shouldn't exist, and promised a future he couldn't yet comprehend. What he couldn't know, was that outside his chamber door, Prince Lysander Ravencroft stood perfectly still, listening to the steady beat of the human child's heart. His silver eyes darkened to the color of storm clouds as ancient hunger warred with something else, something he hadn't felt in centuries. Hope. For Elian was more than just a talented orphan with an eye for the supernatural. He was the key to breaking a curse that had bound the Ravencroft line since their fall from grace. A curse that could only be lifted by one who could truly see the world beyond the veil, and who would willingly offer what Lysander could never take by force. But such revelations would come later. For now, the vampire prince would wait, watching over the boy who might very well hold the fate of his immortal soul in those small, creative hands. 3 weeks passed, like a dream in Ravencroft Castle. For Elian, who had never known comfort beyond the occasional dry corner of the orphanage attic, the opulence surrounding him was almost incomprehensible. His fever had broken on the 3rd day, banished by medicines that tasted of earth and moonlight, administered by Lysander's own hand. By the end of the 1st week, Elian could walk the vast chambers of the castle without his legs trembling beneath him. The castle itself defied explanation. From the outside, glimpsed only through windows that overlooked a courtyard choked with wild roses, it appeared partially ruined exactly as the legends described. Yet inside, it sprawled impossibly, corridors extending where none should exist, staircases spiraling up to towers that couldn't possibly stand. The architecture seemed alive, shifting subtly when Elian wasn't looking directly at it. "The castle exists in multiple realms simultaneously," Lysander had explained one evening as they dined in a great hall illuminated by floating orbs of blue flame. "What appears ruined in your world remains intact in mine." Elian, dressed in finely tailored clothes that had appeared mysteriously in his chambers, nodded as if this made perfect sense. In truth, after all he had seen, it did. "Are there others like you here?" he asked, pushing his barely touched plate away. Although recovered from his illness, his appetite remained small, a fact that seemed to trouble Lysander, though the prince never pressed him to eat more. Lysander's expression darkened, silver eyes dimming to the color of tarnished coins. "Once, these halls echoed with the voices of my kin. Now," he gestured to the empty chairs lining the massive table, "I am the last of the Ravencroft line." "What happened to them?" Elian asked before immediately regretting his boldness. "I'm sorry, you don't have to." "No apologies necessary," Lysander interrupted, his lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Curiosity is the hallmark of an inquiring mind. To answer your question, war happened. Betrayal happened." He paused, running one pale finger around the rim of his goblet, which, Elian had noted, never contained food or water, only a thick, dark liquid. "And a curse happened." Lysander rose abruptly, moving to one of the tall windows that looked out upon the forest. Moonlight silvered his profile, accentuating his inhuman beauty. Come, it's time I showed you something. Elian followed the vampire prince through a labyrinth of corridors he hadn't yet explored. They descended a spiral staircase that seemed to go down much further than the castle's foundation should allow, the air growing progressively cooler, charged with an energy that made the fine hairs on Elian's arms stand on end. They emerged into a vast circular chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness far above. At its center stood a pedestal of black marble, upon which rested a crystal orb the size of Elian's head. The orb glowed with a pulsating azure light, casting eerie shadows across the chamber's stone walls. "The heart of Ravencroft," Lysander said, his voice hushed with reverence. "The source of our family's power and the anchor of our curse." Elian approached cautiously, drawn by an inexplicable pull that seemed to emanate from the crystal. Within its depths, he could see shapes moving, creatures with wings and claws, landscapes of impossible beauty, architecture that defied the laws of physics. It was as if someone had reached into his dreams and given them physical form. It's like my drawings," he whispered, awed. Lysander's hand came to rest on his shoulder, cool and reassuring. "Yes, that is why I brought you here, Elian. That is why I saved you." Elian tore his gaze from the mesmerizing crystal to look up at Lysander. "I don't understand. The heart contains visions of the realm between realms, what some call the veil. Most humans cannot perceive it at all. Some, like the superstitious villagers of Ravenshire, sense it only as vague discomfort or fear. But you—" Lysander's eyes gleamed with excitement. "You see it naturally. Your drawings capture elements of the veil that you shouldn't be able to perceive." The vampire prince circled the pedestal, his movements fluid and predatory. 5 centuries ago, when the humans rose against us, a powerful witch allied with our enemies. She couldn't destroy the Ravencrofts entirely. Our connection to the veil made us too powerful, but she could weaken us. His voice hardened with ancient bitterness. She created a curse that thinned our blood with each generation, diminishing our power, our connection to the veil. One by one, my kin withered or were hunted down. I alone survived, but even I am bound by constraints that my ancestors would have found laughable. Elian's mind raced, connecting fragments of legend he'd heard whispered in Ravenshire with the reality before him. The stories say the Ravencrofts were banished for blood rituals and dark magic. Lysander laughed, a sound like glass breaking. Humans fear what they cannot understand. Yes, we require blood to sustain ourselves. It is our nature. But the rituals? Those were communion with the veil. Nothing more sinister than your church's communion with their god. His expression softened as he looked at Elian. We ruled justly for centuries. Ravenshire prospered under our protection. Returning to Elian's side, Lysander knelt, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. The curse can be broken, but only by one who can truly see the veil without aid or artifice. One like you, Elian. A chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's cool air ran through Elian. What would I have to do? Nothing yet, Lysander assured him, rising to his feet. You are still young, your gift still developing. I will teach you, guide you to understand what you see. When the time is right, perhaps in a few years, you will help me perform a ritual to restore the heart's full power. And then what happens? Elian asked, his gaze drawn back to the pulsating crystal. Lysander's eyes gleamed with an intensity that was both thrilling and frightening. Then the true glory of the Ravencroft line will be restored, and you, my young friend, will have a place of honor in the new order to come. Later that night, Elian sat on the windowsill of his chamber, staring out at the moonlit forest. His journal lay open in his lap, its pages filled with new drawings, more detailed, more vivid than ever before. Being in the castle near the heart seemed to have strengthened his visions. Sometimes now he saw flickers of the veil, even when he was awake. Transparent creatures drifting through walls, colors shifting in patterns that told stories if only he could understand their language. A soft knock at his door pulled him from his reverie. "Enter!" he called, expecting Lysander. Instead, a young woman stepped into the room. She was human, or at least more human than Lysander, with copper hair that fell in waves to her waist and eyes the color of amber. She wore a simple dress of forest green, a leather satchel slung across her body. "Who are you?" Elian asked, sliding from the windowsill. "My name is Freya," she replied with a small curtsy. "I serve Lord Ravencroft, as did my mother before me, and her mother before her." Elian blinked in surprise. "There are other people here. I haven't seen anyone else. We keep to the east wing mostly," Freya explained, moving further into the room. "There are 7 of us remaining, descendants of the original human servants who chose to stay loyal to the Ravencroft family after the uprising." "Lysander never mentioned you," Elian said, suddenly uncertain. A flicker of something. Hurt? Resignation crossed Freya's face. "His lordship has his reasons, I'm sure. I've come because—" She hesitated, then reached into her satchel and withdrew a small wooden box. "Because I thought you might need these." She opened the box to reveal an array of artists' supplies: charcoals, pastel chalks, fine brushes, small pots of pigment. "I noticed your drawings when I came to clean your room while you were breakfasting with his lordship. You have a remarkable gift." Elian stared at the art supplies in wonder. Even at the orphanage, he'd hoarded stub ends of pencils and made ink from berries. The idea of proper materials seemed like a fantasy. "These are for me," Freya nodded, her amber eyes warm. "Consider them a welcome gift." "Thank you," Elian breathed, reaching out to touch a stick of charcoal reverently. "This is the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me, except—" His eyes flicked toward the door. "Except Lysander saving my life, of course." "Of course," Freya agreed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She glanced at his journal. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Elian nodded. Freya set the box of supplies on a nearby table and gently took the journal, her fingers tracing the lines of his latest drawing, a landscape where the trees grew upside down, their roots tangling with stars in a night sky that somehow flowed like water. "You truly see the veil," she murmured, more to herself than to Elian. "That's what Lysander says," Elian confirmed. "He showed me the heart today. He says I can help break a curse." Freya's head snapped up, amber eyes suddenly intense. "He told you about the curse already?" There was something in her tone that made Elian uneasy. "Is that bad?" Freya carefully closed the journal and handed it back to him. "No, not bad. Just unexpected. His lordship usually moves more cautiously." She forced a smile. "He must see great potential in you." An awkward silence fell between them, broken when Freya glanced toward the window. "It's late. You should rest. His lordship mentioned beginning your formal education tomorrow." As she turned to leave, Elian called after her, "Will I see you again?" Pausing at the door, Freya looked back at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "That depends on his lordship." "But I hope so, Elian. I truly hope so." After she left, Elian returned to the windowsill, his mind whirling with new questions. Why had Lysander hidden the existence of human servants? Why had Freya seemed so alarmed about him learning of the curse? And what exactly would breaking this curse entail? For the first time since arriving at the castle, Elian felt a twinge of doubt. He opened his journal to a fresh page and began to draw, trying to sort his thoughts through art, as he always had. What emerged beneath his fingers was troubling. A boy, himself, standing between 2 shadowy figures, who both reached toward him with hands that were half human, half claw. When Lysander came to fetch him the next morning, Elian had already been awake for hours. The vampire prince seemed especially animated, leading Elian to a part of the castle he hadn't yet seen. A vast library with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow, shelves groaning under the weight of ancient tomes. Your education begins today, Lysander announced, gesturing to the immensity of knowledge surrounding them. Not the mundane education you would have received in Ravenshire, arithmetic and farming techniques. He sneered slightly, but true education. The history of the realms, the nature of the veil, the language of symbols that will help you interpret your visions. Over the following days, Elian immersed himself in studies more fascinating than anything he could have imagined. Lysander proved an attentive teacher, patient with questions yet demanding in expectations. They spent hours poring over texts written in languages Elian shouldn't have been able to understand, but somehow could, examining illustrations of creatures that matched those in his dreams. One evening, about a week after meeting Freya, whom he hadn't seen since, Elian worked up the courage to ask the question that had been troubling him. "Lysander," he began, looking up from a tome detailing the hierarchies of beings that dwelled in the Vale, "why didn't you tell me there were other people in the castle?" The vampire prince went very still, silver eyes narrowing slightly. "Ah, you've met the servants." "Just one." "Freya," Elian admitted, "she brought me art supplies." Lysander relaxed marginally. "I see. I didn't mention them because they are inconsequential to our work. They maintain the castle, nothing more. They're descendants of your loyal followers," Elian pressed. "Doesn't that make them important?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Lysander's perfect features. "They serve their purpose, as their ancestors did. But they cannot see what you see, Elian. They cannot help me break the curse." He closed the book Elian had been studying with a decisive snap. "I would caution you against becoming too attached to Freya or any of the others. Their lives are fleeting, as all human lives are. Except mine," Elian asked quietly. Something unreadable flashed in Lysander's eyes. "Your destiny is different," he said carefully. "Now, enough of this distraction. Tomorrow we begin practical applications of what you've learned. It's time you started consciously accessing the Veil, not merely glimpsing it in dreams and artistic inspiration." Later that night, Elian was awakened by a soft tapping at his chamber door. Expecting Lysander, he was surprised when Freya slipped inside, a finger pressed to her lips in a gesture for silence. She carried a small lantern that cast just enough light to illuminate her worried expression. "We haven't much time," she whispered, moving to his bedside. "His lordship is in communion with the heart and won't notice my presence. But such moments are brief." Elian sat up, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "I need to know what he's told you about breaking the curse," Freya said urgently. "The specifics of the ritual." "Nothing specific," Elian admitted. "Just that it will require my ability to see the Veil, and that it won't happen for years yet when I'm older." Relief washed over Freya's features. "There's still time, then." "Time for what?" Elian demanded, growing increasingly uneasy. "Freya, what aren't you telling me?" The young woman sank onto the edge of his bed, lantern light dancing across her troubled face. "The curse is real, Elian, and you can indeed break it, but his lordship hasn't told you the price." A cold knot formed in Elian's stomach. "What price?" Freya took a deep breath. "My family has served the Ravencrofts for generations. We keep their secrets, tend to their needs, but we also keep another oath. One sworn to humanity." Her amber eyes locked with his. "The ritual to break the curse requires the complete absorption of a Veil Seer's essence. Your essence, Elian." "Absorption," Elian repeated, not comprehending. "He will consume you entirely, body, mind, soul," Freya explained, her voice breaking slightly. "Not just your blood, as vampires normally feed, but your entire being. Your gift will become his, and you will cease to exist." The room seemed to spin around Elian. "No," he whispered. "He saved me. He's teaching me. He is preparing you," Freya interrupted gently. "Strengthening your connection to the Veil, honing your ability to see it clearly. The stronger your gift grows, the more powerful he will become when he finally takes it." She reached out, clasping his hand in hers. "I've watched him do this before, Elian. Once every century he finds a child with the sight. Always orphans, always vulnerable, always desperately grateful for his attention and care. Elian pulled his hand away, scrambling back against the headboard. "You're lying," he accused, though doubt had already taken root. "Lysander wouldn't—" "Ask him," Freya challenged. "Ask him directly what happens to you during the ritual. Watch his eyes when he answers." Before Elian could respond, a gust of cold wind extinguished Freya's lantern, plunging the room into darkness. The temperature dropped precipitously, frost forming on the window panes in intricate patterns. "He comes," Freya whispered, terror evident in her voice. "I've stayed too long." She pressed something into Elian's hand, a small, cool object that felt like a stone. "When you're ready to know the truth, hold this and speak my name 3 times. I'll come to you." With that, she slipped away into the shadows of the room. Seconds later, Elian heard the distinctive sound of Lysander's footsteps in the corridor outside. Quickly, he shoved whatever Freya had given him beneath his pillow and lay down, feigning sleep. The door opened silently. Elian kept his breathing deep and even. Though his heart hammered so loudly, he was certain Lysander could hear it. Cool fingers brushed his forehead, lingering there for a moment before withdrawing. "Dream well, my key," Lysander's voice murmured so softly it might have been imagination. "Soon you will unlock worlds beyond imagining." The door closed and Elian was alone again. Only then did he dare reach beneath his pillow, withdrawing the object Freya had given him. In the faint moonlight from the window, he could make out a small stone amulet, carved with symbols similar to those he'd been studying in Lysander's ancient texts. Symbols of protection and truth-seeing. Doubt warred with loyalty in Elian's heart. Lysander had saved him, given him a home, taught him to understand the strange visions that had made him an outcast. But there had always been moments, fleeting looks, cryptic statements, the way the vampire sometimes studied him like a farmer, assessing a ripening crop, that had troubled him. Could Freya be telling the truth? Or was this some test Lysander had devised, a way to gauge Elian's loyalty? Outside his window, the forest of impossibly tall trees swayed in a wind that carried whispers just beyond comprehension. Somewhere in the depths of the castle, the heart of Ravencroft pulsed with ancient power, calling to the part of Elian that could see beyond the veil of ordinary reality. And beneath it all, buried in the foundations of the castle itself, something else stirred, something neither human nor vampire, something that had waited centuries for a boy who could truly see. Clutching the amulet tightly in his fist, Elian made a decision. He would continue his studies with Lysander, showing no sign of his newfound suspicion, but he would also seek the truth about the curse, about the fate of the other children Freya had mentioned, about the true nature of the power that thrummed beneath Ravencroft Castle. For Elian was beginning to understand that he stood at the center of a conflict far older and more complex than a simple curse on a vampire bloodline. And the choice he would ultimately make might affect not just his own destiny, but the balance between realms that had held for millennia. As dawn approached, casting weak grey light through his window, Elian finally drifted into uneasy sleep. In his dreams, the heart of Ravencroft pulsed like a living thing, its crystal facets reflecting not his face, but the faces of countless children before him, all with his same gift, all who had vanished into the vampire prince's eternal hunger. And beneath their reflections, something else watched and waited, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but patient beyond human understanding. Something that had chosen Elian for reasons of its own, reasons that even Lysander, for all his centuries of existence, could not begin to comprehend. The days that followed passed in a strange dance of knowledge and deception. Each morning, Elian met Lysander in the Grand Library, absorbing ancient wisdom about the Vale and the creatures that dwelled within it. The vampire prince seemed pleased with his progress, praising Elian's quick mind and innate understanding of concepts that should have been beyond a human child. "Your gift grows stronger daily," Lysander remarked one evening as they stood before a massive map that shifted and changed as they watched, depicting not physical geography, but the flow of energies between realms. Soon, you'll be able to see the veil while fully awake, not just in dreams and artistic trances. Elian nodded, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. When will that happen? The winter solstice approaches, Lysander replied, silver eyes gleaming with anticipation. The boundary between realms thins at such times. We shall conduct a small ritual to enhance your sight. He placed a cool hand on Elian's shoulder. Nothing dangerous, I assure you. Merely a stepping stone on your path. The word sent ice through Elian's veins, though he maintained his expression of eager interest. Each night, when he was certain Lysander was occupied elsewhere, Elian removed Freya's amulet from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard and studied it. The symbols carved into its surface matched those in the oldest texts Lysander had shown him, symbols of warding and revelation, protection and truth-seeking. 3 times he had nearly summoned Freya as instructed, and 3 times he had hesitated, uncertainty staying his tongue. What if she was manipulating him for reasons of her own? What if this was somehow a test of his loyalty to Lysander? But the dreams continued, growing more vivid each night. Faces of children with his same gift, their expressions frozen in moments of horrified realization. Sometimes he woke, gasping, certain he had heard their screams echoing through time itself. On the 7th night after Freya's visit, Elian made his decision. Clutching the amulet in his palm, he whispered her name 3 times, each utterance barely louder than a breath. The air in his chamber thickened, shimmering like heat above summer stones. Freya appeared not at the door, as expected, but from within the shimmer itself, as though stepping through an invisible curtain. "You called," she said simply, her copper hair unbound and flowing around her like liquid fire in the moonlight. "How did you—" Elian began, startled by her method of arrival. "The old ways aren't entirely forgotten among some of us," Freya replied, moving to sit beside him on the bed. "The amulet creates a temporary pathway, hidden from his lordship's senses." Elian studied her with new awareness. "You're more than a servant, aren't you?" A sad smile touched her lips. "My family has served the Ravencrofts for generations, yes. But we've also served as watchers, guardians of a balance Lysander would destroy in his obsession with breaking the curse. I want to know everything," Elian said firmly. "The truth about the curse, about the children before me, about what's really beneath this castle. Something's down there, isn't it? Something alive." Freya's amber eyes widened slightly. "You've sensed it already. Extraordinary." She took a deep breath. "The tale is long and complex, but we have little time. The simplest version is this. The Ravencrofts were never merely vampires, Elian. They were guardians of the threshold between realms, tasked with maintaining the balance between the world of humans and the Veil. Lysander told me something similar," Elian interjected. "But did he tell you they abused their position?" Freya countered. "Over centuries, they began to draw too much power from the Veil, disrupting the balance they were meant to protect. The being beneath the castle, what you've sensed, is an ancient one, a consciousness that exists primarily in the Veil but maintains an anchor in our world through the heart of Ravencroft." Elian's mind raced, connecting fragments of knowledge from his studies with Lysander. "The heart isn't just a crystal, is it? It's a living thing. It's a physical manifestation of the Ancient One's consciousness in our realm," Freya confirmed. "The Ravencrofts were meant to commune with it, to learn from it, to help it maintain the balance between worlds. Instead, they sought to harness its power for themselves. And the curse was no curse at all, but a correction," Freya said firmly. "The witch who supposedly cursed the Ravencrofts was actually a previous Veilseer, like you, who gave herself willingly to the Ancient One to restore balance. Her sacrifice created a binding that limited how much power the Ravencrofts could draw from the Veil." Elian frowned, processing this information against what Lysander had told him. "But Lysander believes consuming me My gift will break this binding. He's been trying for centuries, Freya confirmed grimly. Each time he finds a child with the sight, nurtures their gift, strengthens their connection to the veil. Then, during a ritual, he attempts to absorb their essence entirely. He believes this will give him direct access to the Ancient One's power, allowing him to break the binding and restore his family's former dominance. Has he ever succeeded? Something dark and sorrowful passed across Freya's features. No, each attempt has failed, though the children were indeed lost. Their essences were absorbed not by Lysander, but by the Ancient One itself. It protects itself and the balance, even as it grieves each sacrifice. Elian's heart pounded against his ribs. The faces in my dreams, the children who came before you, Freya nodded. The Ancient One preserves their memory, their essence. They are not truly gone, but neither are they as they were. And each failure has driven Lysander further into obsession. Rising from the bed, Elian moved to the window, gazing out at the spectral forest that surrounded the castle. Why am I different? Why does he think I'll succeed where the others failed? Your gift is stronger than any veil seer in centuries, Freya explained, joining him at the window. And you came to his attention at a critical moment. The winter solstice this year marks 500 years exactly since the binding was created. Cosmic forces align in ways that won't happen again for millennia. So what happens if he succeeds? Elian asked, though he suspected he already knew. Catastrophe, Freya said simply. The veil would tear open, creatures that have been kept separate from humanity would pour through, and the Ancient One, which has maintained balance for eons, would be enslaved to Lysander's will. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Millions would die in the ensuing chaos. The world as we know it would end. Silence fell between them, as Elian absorbed the enormity of what she described. Finally, he turned to face her directly. What can I do? I can't just run away. He'd find me. No, you can't run, Freya agreed. But there is another path, one that no previous veil seer has been offered. She hesitated, then continued. The Ancient One has chosen you, Elian, not just as a potential sacrifice, but as a true communion. What does that mean? It means you could willingly join with the Ancient One, as the witch did 5 centuries ago. Not to be consumed, but to merge, to become something new, a true guardian of the threshold between realms. Freya's eyes glowed with an inner light that wasn't entirely human, but such a choice must be made freely, with full understanding, and it would mean leaving your human life behind forever. Before Elian could respond, a bone-deep chill swept through the room. Frost formed instantly on the windows, spreading in intricate patterns that resembled the symbols in Lysander's ancient texts. He comes, Freya whispered, alarm evident in her voice. Something has alerted him. Perhaps he sensed our discussion of the Ancient One. Panic gripped Elian. What do I do? Freya pressed the amulet back into his hand. Keep this hidden. Pretend you know nothing. Continue your studies. Her form began to shimmer, becoming translucent. The solstice is 3 days hence. Before then, you must go to the heart chamber alone. Place your hand upon the crystal and open your mind. The Ancient One will show you what you need to know. And if Lysander suspects, then we are all lost, Freya said simply, her voice fading as her form dissolved into mist. Trust yourself, Elian. Your gift is greater than you know. As the last trace of her disappeared, the chamber door flew open with such force that it splintered against the wall. Lysander stood in the doorway, his normally elegant appearance disheveled, silver eyes blazing with an inner light that was terrifying to behold. Who was here? He demanded, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. That servant girl, Freya. It wasn't a question, but a snarled recognition. Elian backed away instinctively, clutching the amulet behind his back. She brought me more art supplies, he lied, gesturing weakly toward his desk where various charcoals and pigments were arranged. I've been drawing the creatures you described from the texts. Don't lie to me, child. Lysander interrupted, moving into the room with preternatural speed, suddenly looming over Elian. I felt the disturbance in the fabric between realms. That girl is more than she appears, and she has been filling your head with lies. Heart hammering, Elian lifted his chin defiantly. Has she? Or has she simply told me what you've been hiding? About the ritual? About the children before me? Something dangerous flickered in Lysander's expression, surprise quickly masked by cold calculation. Then, to Elian's astonishment, the vampire prince laughed, a sound entirely devoid of humor. So, the little mouse shows her true nature at last, he said, pacing a slow circle around Elian. I had wondered when she would approach you. The last of her line, descendants of the witch who created the binding that has imprisoned my family's power for centuries. She told me what really happened, Elian said, struggling to keep his voice steady. How the Ravencrofts abused their position as guardians, how the binding was necessary to protect the balance. Lysander stopped directly before him, studying Elian with eyes that had darkened to the color of storm clouds. And you believe her? This servant girl, over me, who saved your life, who has taught you to understand your gift, who has given you a home when the world cast you aside. Guilt twisted in Elian's stomach, but he held firm. I believe the dreams I've been having, the faces of the children who came before me. For a moment, Lysander went very still, an unnatural stillness no human could achieve. Then he sighed, a sound of genuine regret that caught Elian by surprise. I had hoped to wait until you were older, the vampire prince said softly, to give you years of learning, of growth before the final ritual. But it seems circumstances have forced my hand. Moving to the window, Lysander gazed out at the night, his profile sharp against the darkness beyond. What Freya told you holds elements of truth, cleverly twisted to serve her family's agenda. Yes, there is an ancient one. Yes, its consciousness manifests partly through the heart. And yes, I seek to break the binding that has limited the Ravencroft's power for 5 centuries. He turned back to Elian, his expression intense but not unkind. But the balance she speaks of is a lie, Elian. The Ancient One is not a benevolent guardian, but a parasite, feeding on the energies of both realms while giving nothing in return. My ancestors discovered this truth and sought to harness its power for the good of humanity, to create a world where the gifts of the Veil could benefit all. Then why hide the truth about the ritual? Elian challenged. Why not tell me from the beginning what would happen to me? Lysander's expression softened into something almost paternal. Because you weren't ready to understand the nature of the sacrifice required. It is not consumption, as Freya claimed, but transformation. Your human form, yes, would cease to exist, but your consciousness, your essence, would join with mine, eternally preserved, as we together become the new guardians of both realms. He extended a hand toward Elian, palm upward in invitation. I offer you immortality, child. Not death, but transcendence. Together, we could reshape the world into something more wondrous than humans have ever dreamed possible. Elian stared at the offered hand, torn between conflicting narratives. Lysander sounded sincere, his explanation plausible against what he knew of the vampire's character, yet the dreams, the faces of the lost children, felt undeniably true. I need time, he said finally, not taking Lysander's hand. Time to think. Something dangerous flickered in Lysander's eyes, quickly masked by understanding. Of course, but not too much time, I fear. The solstice approaches, and with it our best chance to complete the ritual successfully. He lowered his hand slowly. 3 days, Elian. 3 days to make your choice. But know this. Freya and her kind would keep humanity trapped in ignorance, denied the wonders that lie beyond the veil. I offer progress, enlightenment, evolution. With that, Lysander moved toward the door, his movements once again fluid and controlled. Rest now. Tomorrow I will show you wonders I had planned to withhold until you were older, proof of what we could accomplish together." As the vampire reached the doorway, he paused, looking back at Elian with an expression that seemed genuinely sad. "She's using you, child, just as her ancestor used other Veil Seers before you. Don't let her family claim another victim in their misguided crusade." After Lysander departed, Elian sank to the floor, his mind whirling with contradictory information. The amulet felt heavy in his palm, its symbols seeming to pulse with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Who was telling the truth? Freya, with her dire warnings of catastrophe, or Lysander, with his vision of transcendence and evolution? That night, sleep eluded Elian entirely. He sat at his desk until dawn, drawing feverishly in his journal. Images that came not from conscious thought, but from somewhere deeper. The pages filled with illustrations of the heart of Ravencroft, but transformed, showing it not as a crystal on a pedestal, but as a pulsing, organic thing with tendrils that reached throughout the castle and beyond, into the very fabric of reality itself. As the first grey light of dawn crept through his window, Elian made his decision. He would go to the heart chamber alone, as Freya had instructed. He would place his hand on the crystal and open his mind to the Ancient One, whatever it truly was. Only then could he know which path to choose. What he couldn't possibly anticipate was that his decision had set in motion events that would bring three forces, Lysander, Freya, and the Ancient One itself, into a collision that had been brewing for 5 centuries. Nor could he know that when he finally learned the complete truth, it would be more complex and terrifying than either Lysander or Freya had revealed. A truth that would demand of him a sacrifice greater than anyone had asked of any Veil Seer before. As Elian watched the sunrise paint the whispering woods in shades of amber and gold, one certainty formed in his mind. In 3 days' time, at the winter solstice, the fate of multiple realms would rest in his hands, and whatever choice he made would change everything forever. The following morning, Elian found himself in the castle's eastern wing for the first time, led by Lysander through corridors adorned with portraits of Ravencroft's past. Their silver eyes followed his progress, generations of vampiric nobility regarding him with expressions that seemed to fluctuate between hunger and hope. "Today, I show you the truth," Lysander said, stopping before a set of ornate double doors inlaid with silver and obsidian. "What lies beyond will help you understand what we could accomplish together." The doors swung open at Lysander's touch, revealing a vast chamber unlike any Elian had yet seen in the castle. Glass tanks lined the walls, filled with softly glowing liquids in which floated things, creatures that defied description, hybrids of species that should never have merged, beings with too many limbs or eyes or mouths. "The veil contains infinite wonders," Lysander explained, leading Elian past the tanks. "Creatures of immense power and beauty. For centuries, my family worked to create bridges between realms, to harness these beings' gifts." Elian's eyes widened as they passed a tank containing what appeared to be a child, human in form but with skin that shifted colors like an aurora, eyes that contained galaxies rather than irises. "Is that one of your predecessors?" Lysander confirmed, placing a hand on the glass. "Not consumed, as Freya would have you believe, but transformed. This one's gift was strong, but not strong enough to complete the ritual. Still, I preserved what remained." Horror and fascination warred within Elian as he stared at the suspended figure. It showed no signs of consciousness, yet wasn't quite lifeless either, more like a flower preserved in amber, beautiful but static. "You collect them?" he asked, voice barely audible. "I honor them," Lysander corrected, moving Elian along. "Each attempted to help me break the binding. Each sacrificed themselves willingly for a greater purpose." They reached the center of the chamber, where a pedestal similar to the one that held the heart stood. Upon it rested not a crystal, but an open book bound in what appeared to be human skin. Symbols writhed across its pages, rearranging themselves continuously. "The Codex Valis," Lysander said reverently, "the complete record of all pathways between our realm and the Veil. With this in the heart, we could not merely glimpse the wonders beyond, but bring them fully into our world." Elian studied the shifting text, finding he could almost understand it. Concepts just beyond the edge of comprehension, tantalizingly close. "Imagine," Lysander continued, his voice taking on a fervent quality, "a world where death is merely a transition, where human potential is no longer limited by our frail forms, where the gifts of the Veil, immortality, transformation, creation beyond imagining, are available to all worthy enough to receive them." "And who decides who is worthy?" Elian asked quietly. Lysander's smile held genuine warmth. "We would, together. You have not merely the sight, Elian, but compassion, intelligence, vision, qualities I've come to respect deeply." He closed the codex with gentle reverence. "This is no consumption, no destruction. It is union, transformation, transcendence." As they left the Chamber of Wonders, Elian's mind raced. Lysander's vision was seductive, a world transformed, limitations transcended. Yet the image of that suspended child thing, preserved like a specimen, haunted him. "Rest now," Lysander instructed as they reached Elian's chamber. "Consider what I've shown you. Tomorrow I will answer any questions that remain." He paused, silver eyes searching Elian's face. "The solstice approaches. Soon you must decide." Alone in his room, Elian withdrew Freya's amulet from its hiding place, turning it over in his palm as her warnings echoed in his memory. Catastrophe, chaos, the end of the world as they knew it. But what if she was wrong? What if the binding truly did constrain something magnificent, something that could elevate humanity rather than destroy it? One way to know for certain remained. Heart-pounding, Elian made his decision. He would go to the heart chamber tonight, not waiting for morning. He would confront the Ancient One directly and demand the truth. Midnight found him descending the spiral staircase he'd previously navigated with Lysander, moving silently through the castle's depths. The heart chamber was eerily still when he entered, the great crystal pulsing with a subdued azure glow that barely illuminated the circular space. Elian approached slowly, Freya's amulet clutched tightly in one hand. The heart seemed to respond to his presence, its light intensifying, patterns shifting within its crystalline depths like thoughts taking form. "I want the truth," Elian whispered, standing before the pedestal. "Not Lysander's version, not Freya's. The truth." Gathering his courage, he pressed his palm flat against the crystal's smooth surface. Instantly the world dissolved around him. He stood no longer in the chamber beneath Ravencroft Castle, but in a vast nothingness that somehow contained everything. Colors that had no names in human language swirled around him. Sounds that were also tastes, scents that were also emotions, overwhelmed his senses. "Veil Seer." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating not through his ears but within his very being. It carried neither malice nor benevolence, simply immense, ancient awareness. "Are you the Ancient One?" Elian asked, his voice seeming small against the vastness surrounding him. "I am many and one. I am the threshold, the balance, the between." Images cascaded through Elian's mind. The creation of the Veil, the selection of the Ravencrofts as guardians, their slow corruption as they grew addicted to power, the binding created to restore balance. "Lysander believes breaking the binding will allow humanity to evolve," Elian said. "That you're a parasite, constraining our potential." A sensation like gentle, terrible laughter rippled through the nothingness. "Lysander Ravencroft seeks power, not evolution. The binding prevents not progress, but catastrophe." More images flooded Elian's consciousness. Visions of a world where the veil had been torn open. Creatures of nightmare stalking through cities reduced to ruins. Humans warped into things neither fully human nor fully other, suffering eternity in half-transformed states. The binding maintains separation necessary for both realms. Without it, both would collapse into chaos. And the ritual? The children before me? Elian asked, struggling to maintain his sense of self amidst the overwhelming input. Lysander sought to absorb their essence, their connection to the veil. I intervened, preserving what could be saved. The floating child in the tank appeared in Elian's mind, but from a different perspective. Not a preserved specimen, but a consciousness held in stasis, protected from complete dissolution. But Freya said you've chosen me for communion, not sacrifice, Elian pressed. Well, what does that mean? The vastness around him shifted, condensing into a more comprehensible form, a figure of light and shadow, vaguely humanoid but constantly shifting, its features suggesting both great age and eternal youth. You are different, Veilseer. Your gift surpasses all who came before. You could become not sacrifice but vessel, not consumed but transformed, the new guardian of the threshold. Like what Lysander promised, Elian whispered. Similar in form, opposed in purpose. The Ancient One's presence intensified. Lysander would use your gift to break the binding, believing he could control what follows. He cannot. Communion with me would strengthen the binding, restore the balance, create a new guardian to replace the Ravencroft line. And what happens to me, to who I am now? You would change. Your human form would cease. Your consciousness would merge with mine, neither fully preserved nor fully lost, but transformed into something greater. The enormity of the choice pressed down upon Elian. Sacrifice either way, transformation either way, but toward vastly different ends. I need to think, he said finally. The solstice approaches, Lysander prepares. Choose wisely, Veilseer. With those words, the vision dissolved, and Elian found himself once more in the heart chamber, slumped against the pedestal. The crystal pulsed softly, its light dimmed to almost nothing. As he struggled to his feet, a slow, clapping sound echoed through the chamber. Lysander emerged from the shadows, his expression a mixture of admiration and fury. "Impressive," the vampire prince said coldly. "Few can commune with the heart directly. Your gift truly is remarkable." Elian backed away, clutching the amulet tightly. "You were watching. I've been watching since you entered the castle, child." Lysander moved closer, his grace now seeming predatory rather than elegant. "Did you think I wouldn't notice your midnight wanderings? Your whispered conversations with that treacherous servant?" "The Ancient One showed me the truth," Elian said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Breaking the binding would destroy both realms, not elevate them." Lysander laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the chamber. "Of course it would tell you that. The parasite fears losing its host." His silver eyes hardened. "I had hoped you would come willingly to our union, Elian, that you would understand the magnificence of what I offer. But I see now that Freya's poison has infected your mind too deeply." With preternatural speed, Lysander closed the distance between them, seizing Elian's wrist with crushing force. The amulet fell from the boy's grasp, clattering against the stone floor. "No matter," the vampire prince said, his voice softening to something almost regretful. "Willing or not, your gift will serve its purpose. The solstice comes tomorrow night, and the binding will finally break." Darkness claimed Elian as Lysander's other hand closed over his mouth and nose, smothering his consciousness into oblivion. He awoke in a chamber he'd never seen before, circular like the heart room, but smaller, with walls inscribed with symbols similar to those in the Codex Vailis. Elian found himself secured to an altar of black marble, silver manacles binding his wrists and ankles. Above him, a skylight revealed stars wheeling across the night sky. "The solstice approaches," Lysander's voice came from nearby. The vampire prince stood before a smaller version of the heart, this one blood red rather than azure. "In 1 hour the stars align, and our great work begins." Elian struggled against his bonds, finding them unyielding. "This isn't evolution," he said desperately. "It's destruction. The Ancient One showed me." "The Ancient One showed you what it wanted you to see," Lysander interrupted, moving to stand beside the altar. "Just as I showed you what I wanted you to see. We all manipulate Elian. The difference is I am honest about my ambitions." He brushed a strand of hair from Elian's forehead with almost tender care. "I regret the necessity of restraints. In my fantasies, you stood beside me willingly, understanding the glory of what we would accomplish together. It's not too late," Elian pleaded. "You could still be a guardian, protect the balance instead of destroying it." Something vulnerable flickered across Lysander's perfect features. 5 centuries I've endured the binding. 5 centuries I've watched my kin wither and die, while I alone survived. There is no balance worth such sacrifice, child. As Lysander turned away to make further preparations, Elian closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts on Freya. She had said the amulet created a temporary pathway. Perhaps, if he concentrated hard enough. "Freya," he whispered so softly, even Lysander's vampiric hearing might miss it. "Freya. Freya." Nothing happened. Tears of frustration and fear threatened to spill from Elian's eyes. Lysander moved about the chamber, arranging items on a small table. A silver dagger, a chalice, vials of substances Elian couldn't identify. The skylight showed stars shifting position, drawing closer to whatever alignment Lysander awaited. Time was running out. Then, just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Elian felt it. A subtle shift in the air, a thickening of reality around him. Not a dramatic entrance as before, but something stealthier. A presence slowly materializing beside the altar. Freya appeared, visible only to Elian from his position, her form translucent and flickering like a candle in wind. She pressed a finger to her lips, then touched the manacle securing his right wrist. It sprung open silently. Lysander, focused on his preparations, didn't notice as Elian's right hand was freed. Freya moved to the left manacle, her form growing more substantial with each passing second. "The hour approaches," Lysander announced, turning back toward the altar with the silver dagger in hand. His eyes widened as he saw Freya materializing. "You!" The vampire lunged forward with blinding speed, but Freya was prepared. She threw a handful of crystalline dust into his face, causing him to recoil with a hiss of pain. In that moment, she freed Elian's remaining bonds. "Run!" she commanded, placing herself between Elian and the temporarily blinded vampire. "To the heart chamber. The Ancient One will protect you." Elian scrambled from the altar, but hesitated at the chamber door. "Come with me." "I cannot," Freya said, her amber eyes sad but determined. "My family's oath binds me here. Go, Elian. The balance depends on you." Lysander recovered with terrifying swiftness, his silver eyes now burning crimson with rage. He seized Freya by the throat, lifting her off the ground. "Your bloodline ends tonight, witch." Tearing himself away from the horrific tableau, Elian fled through the castle's corridors, instinct guiding him toward the heart chamber. Behind him, a scream cut off abruptly, followed by an otherworldly howl of fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of Ravencroft Castle. The heart pulsed with frantic energy when Elian burst into the chamber, its azure light now bright enough to illuminate every corner of the circular space. At its center, the crystal had changed, no longer a solid object, but something fluid, its surface rippling like disturbed water. "Ancient One!" Elian called, approaching the pedestal. "I've made my choice." The castle trembled as Lysander's rage manifested in power that hadn't been seen in centuries. Somewhere above, stone cracked, wood splintered. The vampire was coming, his full power unleashed by the approaching solstice and fueled by the blood of Freya's sacrifice. The heart's light intensified, beckoning Elian closer. Without hesitation, he placed both hands on the crystal, which yielded like liquid beneath his touch. "I choose communion," he declared as his hands sank into the heart's substance. "I choose balance. I choose to become the guardian." The crystal engulfed him, drawing him in until he stood once more in that vast nothingness that contained everything. The Ancient One's presence surrounded him, neither male nor female, neither benevolent nor malevolent, but simply, enormously there. Chosen freely, it acknowledged. Communion begins. Elian felt himself dissolving, his consciousness expanding beyond the confines of his human form. For a moment, terror gripped him, the fear of cessation, of losing himself entirely. Then understanding bloomed within him as he perceived the truth. This was not an ending, but a transformation. His awareness expanded outward, encompassing Ravencroft Castle, the Whispering Woods, Ravenshire beyond. He perceived Lysander smashing through the chamber door, his perfect face contorted with rage and denial, as he beheld the communion already in progress. "No!" the vampire prince howled, lunging toward the heart. "He is mine! The gift is mine!" But Lysander could not reach him now. Elian existed simultaneously in multiple realms, his consciousness merging with the Ancient One, while somehow remaining distinctly himself. Through the heart, he witnessed the moment of the solstice, stars aligning, cosmic energies converging. But instead of breaking the binding, as Lysander had intended, the communion strengthened it. The barrier between realms firmed, stabilized by Elian's willing sacrifice. Lysander fell to his knees before the heart, watching his centuries of planning crumble. "You've ruined everything," he whispered, silver eyes dimming with defeat. "Not ruined," came Elian's voice, though his human form no longer existed within the heart. "Restored." The chamber filled with light, not the azure of the heart nor the crimson of Lysander's rage, but pure, cleansing white. When it faded, the vampire prince remained kneeling, but transformed. The predatory hunger that had driven him for centuries had vanished from his eyes, replaced by something like peace. "I remember," Lysander said softly, looking up at the heart with wonder rather than obsession. "I remember my purpose, our purpose." Through his expanded consciousness, Elian understood. The communion had not only transformed him, but had healed the corruption that had twisted the Ravencroft line centuries ago. Lysander would remain, not as a tyrant seeking to break the binding, but as its servant, the last of the original guardians, restored to his true purpose. And Elian was everywhere and nowhere. The orphan boy had ceased to exist, yet his essence remained, merged with the Ancient One, yet somehow distinct, a new consciousness that spanned the threshold between realms. Through the heart, he could manifest in forms that Lysander and future guardians could interact with. Through the veil, he could maintain the balance that kept both realms stable. His last human thought, before fully embracing his new existence, was of his journal. The drawings that had captured glimpses of the veil, that had marked him as a veil-seer, that had ultimately led him to his destiny. Those images now seemed childish, limited by human perception and the constraints of paper and ink. Now he could create realities, not merely imagine them. He could shape wonders beyond anything his human mind could have conceived. And somewhere, in the vastness of his new consciousness, the essence of what had once been a lonely orphan boy named Elian smiled. The heart of Ravencroft pulsed once more, then settled into a steady rhythm. The heartbeat of a new guardian, the pulse of balance restored, the promise of wonders yet to come.